Okay. So I have a lot of things that I want to cover, and so I'm going to go rather quickly through this today. But I want to make sure that when we're done, you have an idea of what mob programming is, why we would do it, and how we've done it. And this will give you enough information, hopefully, that you can give it a try on your own if you want to try it. So we started out a long time ago being asked to speak about this. And the first time I talked about it, people seemed to be wanting to know what they should do. And I don't believe I can tell anybody what they should do. I can't tell you what you should do. So I really go along with this quote from Peter Block. I'm not here to tell you how or whether you should do this. I'm telling you why we did it and how we did it. And then you can decide for yourself what you want to do. I think there's a lot of good in mob programming, and that's where I'm sharing it. So mob programming, I think of it as all the brilliant minds working on the same thing at the same time and in the same space, which to me is what Agile software development is about, and extreme programming. I think the people who originated the idea of Agile had observed that if we separate people by time, like somebody's working on something 6 months before somebody else, or somebody's working on it in a different space, they're up the building, a different part of the building, or in another building or another country, we don't get to communicate as well as maybe we should about the thing we're working on. I kind of noticed that also already in the talks that I've attended here about this need for communication. And I think that that's sort of what Agile was about. What mob programming adds to it is this idea that we're going to be working at a single computer, which is like pair programming, but just with more people. So Joshua Kirievsky, a friend of mine, I heard him talk about pair programming. He says this now about mob programming. But pair programming is the continuous integration of ideas. And for me, that's what mob programming is about. That we're going to have everybody concerned with the work that we're doing, everybody who's involved, is going to be communicating in real time about the things we're working on. Instead of somebody thinking about it 6 months earlier, writing it down, and me having to decipher what they wrote, they're going to be talking directly to me about it while they're in the same context or the same thought space as I am and everyone else on the team. So I like to point out that we want to have everybody that's needed to create this software working together. And this is not always easy to do, but I often hear it as a constraint that, oh, that person's too important and things like that. But if we're really interested in getting this work done as directly as possible and effectively as possible, we might want to change our priority as to what we think is most important to our company or our organization or whatever. So this is what it looks like from the front. This is a picture we took in 2012. I like to point out that some of the people are smiling here. And the reason for it is we took thousands of pictures or hundreds and hundreds of pictures that day with a time-lapse camera, and this is the only one I could find where we looked halfway happy. So we normally look pretty happy, but actually I like to point this out, that this is everybody that was needed to do this software. There are 2 testers pictured here. One of them is completely dedicated to testing. There's a product expert who we were writing the software for. There's a database expert who's a DBA in the company as well. There's a legacy code expert, somebody who understands the projects that we have in the company and how data interacts or plays across projects. There's a couple coding experts, and then there's the useless, worthless manager standing in the back. And that's me. So this is 2012. This is another view of the same thing. I want to point out just 2 or 3 things. You notice that there is 2 keyboards, and those keyboards are used by whoever's at the keyboard at the moment, and I'll explain how that works. And then there's 1 computer that's in use by the team. It's underneath the book on CSS that's in kind of the center of the screen there. That's the computer that we're working at. There are other computers there. There's no rule that you can't have other computers while you're all working together. Matter of fact, there's no rules of any type. We have a few guidelines. I want to make this really clear. I'm sharing with you how we did it. I'm not telling you how to do it. I'm going to show you some pictures in a minute of people all over the world doing this. I also want to point out that it could be done remotely. People often ask that question, so there it is, just to show it. The person at the bottom of the screen, she happens to be in New York City, and the one at the top, Andrea Goulet, she is in Richmond, Virginia. I don't know where the other two gentlemen are, but they would work 3 hours a day, 3 days a week as a group, as a mob. Well, I should say here, we had gotten to the point, by the time we took this picture, we were working this way 8 hours a day, every day. So all week long, this is how we worked. Okay, so this all originated at a place called Hunter Industries. They are a manufacturer of irrigation for landscaping products. Now, where I live, which is in the southern United States towards the Pacific coast, San Diego, we sprinkle, which is a way of putting water onto the ground to make things grow. I know you don't need to do that here, right? Because we never get rain, but you sometimes get rain. So, but this is actually an interesting thing. This company has their byline is built on innovation. And when they invited me to come to work for them in 2011, that was important to me. And I pointed out to the person who was interviewing me, the person who would be my boss, and I made it clear that I don't want to work at a place unless we honor the idea of innovation. Because if you're bringing me in to help, that means you're bringing me in to do what I do best, and that means we're going to really be focusing a lot on figuring out how to make things better rather than just doing what somebody else thinks is the right thing to do. I'll cover that a little bit more if we have the time. This is Hunter now. This is 2016, actually. So they'd moved to a larger, it's a large company. I mean, it's a small company, but it's large for what it is. And maybe 2,500 people or so. So the software development's a relatively small part of the company, but they create code for products that they sell, for internal use in managing the business, for external use for customer interaction. You can actually take your phone, and turn your lighting on at home or turn your sprinklers on or off at home from your phone. So anyways, this is them now. They've grown to about 9 teams. We had the 1 team when I started with them, and about the time I left, they wanted to grow it to more teams, so I worked with them for a while they were doing that. They graciously kept me around to do a little bit of that. Okay, so I'm going to go through about 6 or 8 or 10 pictures just to show this around the world. This is another view of this being done at Hunter, and you can see clearly 2 teams here. Each of these teams have 4 or 5 people on them, and you can see there's standing tables and all kinds of arrangements because we want to make it comfortable for everybody that's doing the work. I'm going to point that out as we go. This is a team that I believe was just getting started. They had heard us speaking at a conference in Seattle, and Alaska is not far from there, a little bit north, and they took it back to Alaska with them. Here's a group. I think they're in France. I got this picture off Twitter. Same with this picture. I think they're in the UK. A group in Hungary. A group at GDS London, which is Government Digital Services. I don't know how much or how constant they are about their mob programming, but I visited them 4 or 5 times. I was not there that particular day, and I would have just said, smile, before I took that picture if I had taken it, because they don't seem like they're too happy that moment. Another group at GDS. So GDS began their Agile journey a number of years back, and they're a good example of how effective a team can be, or a group can be working in an Agile manner, and they're always looking for new ways to improve. This is a company in Boston, Zipcar in Boston. I did visit them. I'm not sure if I took that picture. Unruly in London. This is a place that has 6 or 8 teams that are working almost all the time doing mob programming. Same at Zipcar. I'm not sure if this is a programming session, but it might be. But this looks like a temporary setup, and I want to point out something about this. You notice those chairs? Those aren't chairs you'd want to sit in all day. And you notice that the way they have to turn their bodies to see the screen, that's not a useful thing either. So you want to pay attention to the ergonomics of working when you're doing mob programming all day long. As a matter of fact, I'll go back one thing. This looks like a great setup to me. You can see how they can adjust their chairs to face the way they want to face, and everything is comfortable, far enough apart. Comfort's important. You don't want to be getting headaches from squinting at the screen. You don't want to get a sore neck or a sore back from sitting awkwardly all day. This is a group in London. South Africa, you'll notice they face the other direction in South Africa because they're below the equator. All the rest of the teams are facing the other way. I don't know why, but maybe some of you here have earth science understanding can explain to me. This is in Denmark. I put this in. They're not really mob programming it the second, but they will shortly. I visited them earlier this year, I believe. A group here, not far from here. But I slipped that in, so I'm not sure which direction they're facing there. A group in Florida. Does anyone who know who that is? I heard somebody, that's Grace Hopper. I don't know if they're mob programming or not, but I'd like to think they are. I've never talked to her, but it sure looks like they're all working on the same thing at the same time in the same place, at least. Here's a group in Greece. Here's a group in I'm going to try and say it. Correct me if I'm wrong. Göteborg. Am I close? Close, okay. I did a workshop for these folks, and then they set up to work this way. And all they had to do is draw a couple tables together, put some chairs and some keyboards on the table, and across the way they put a table with a monitor on it. This is not a bad setup, because you can move things around and adjust them to how you like it. I want to point out that they have their workboard right there, so that it's easy for them to look at the work they're doing. They also have, I think we can see in this picture, some stuff on the wall there. So everything's there that they need to do their work. This team is sitting too closely together. So this is sort of an anti-pattern. They need bigger monitors. Now, I believe, I think I got this out of Twitter, I believe they were just trying it for a day. But I used to make a joke when I was teaching things about teamwork that you're not really on a team if you can't smell your teammates. And this overemphasizes the smellability of your teammates. So I'm not saying whether they smell or not, but I am saying when you're sitting that close, you have to really pay attention to your hygiene. These folks got some large monitors. I'm really proud of them. I'm glad that they're doing this, but they're not really programming. Does anybody know where that is? Yeah. So this is exactly the same as mob programming, but in a different kind of a context. They're all working on the same thing at the same time and in the same space. Now, there may be a few people working remotely because there might be somebody in a spacecraft or an observation station somewhere else. But everybody who is needed to do this job is on the job, and they're doing it together. If you need to speak up about what's happening in the information you're monitoring, you're going to do that. You're going to alert the whole area, and they're going to put their attention on what needs to be done at that moment. This is very much like what mob programming is about, and that's why I included it in there. I want to show a little bit of a video. I won't show you very much of it. You can find this on YouTube. Do you have YouTube here? Okay. So we've got the YouTubes, and this is on YouTube. This is showing a team, our team working in 2012 for a whole day. This is 8 hours of work. Now, we begin the day studying together. We spend an hour studying together. It's a tradition we started before we were doing mob programming. We'd study one day a week every Friday for 3 hours. We don't have to do any stand-ups. Matter of fact, eliminated almost all meetings. We were using a 15-minute rotation. I'll explain the rotation in a little bit later. The important thing here is we can see there's still that single computer. Also, we use a technique we call driver navigators, and I'll explain that as well. But you can see the driver at that time was switching seats every 15 minutes, and everyone else is a navigator, including the product owners who come and work with us, at least a few hours a day. And I put that in there. I don't know what he's really thinking. And there's the manager coach, but I do know this. No, managers never do any real work. It's all make-believe. Okay, so I think you've seen enough. Maybe we'll go one moment longer. I want to show one other thing. You can see how active they are. Everybody's sort of engaged and paying attention. Now, this was just a random day. This is how it goes every day. You notice that if you feel like you want to go work alone, at any time you can go do that. It doesn't matter what you feel you want to do. If you don't want to be with the team for a moment, you get up and go. We do ask if you're going to move and work in another area, is you stay close enough so that we can get back to you if we need you in the group for something. But mostly, it's a matter of sort of having I would call it a volunteer situation. I want to point out about the lunchtime. We would take lunch at the same time, and you can kind of see that there. I've got to get my slides back up. That we all left except for one of them, and that's kind of understandable. Not everybody wants to do the same things. But what we found was when we first started working this way, our rule was that you can come in whenever you want, you can leave whenever you want. But once we started working as a team, we noticed that we wanted to be together as a team more and more. And so we started aligning our times. There was no rule that you had to come in at 8 and leave at 5, but we naturally kind of moved our entry and exit from the company to be in the same time because we wanted to accentuate or amplify the amount of time we got to be together. And it worked out really well for us. We would take lunch together. We normally, if we took lunch, we'd go out and take a walk. We have hills everywhere around that company, and we'd go take a walk in the hills, but we wouldn't talk about business. We wouldn't talk about our work. We were just talking about day-to-day life. It was just a time to be together and grow as people together. Okay, so I'm going to do this. Let's do this as a little bit of an audience participation. I'd like to ask you, if you don't mind calling out a little bit, I'd like to ask this question. Why would we work this way? Why would we work with everybody at a single computer? What could be good about this? Can somebody share? I have all day. Really, go ahead. We learn together. We automatically are learning. It's a highly amplified learning environment. What else? What's that? Covers all requirements. So by having the product owner there, we can question it as we go. We understand everything we're doing. If we have a tester there, all the things that are needed were covered. Someone over here had an idea. We're removing the bottlenecks. Remember that. If we get far enough in this talk, I'll come back to that. That's a powerful point. What else? Yes. Knowledge exchange. We're growing in understanding not only of what we do and what we're working on, but about each other and how to work better together. Did you have something too? Oh, you did. We're much smarter when we're working together. Everybody is smarter than anybody. Does that make sense? What else? Yes. We have a very precise focus on one thing. You know, when they talk about limiting the work in process, how many pieces of work do we have in process when we work this way? Shout it out. One. It's a single piece flow automatically. We'll take one more. What's one more idea? We're coming up with the best design, and this is a very agile idea, that the design's got to emerge. And if it doesn't emerge and we thought of it beforehand, it's going to have to change when we get to that point anyways. It's in the doing of the work that we discover the work we must do, and that goes with the design as well. So we get almost always a better design. These are the reasons we kept doing it. The very first day we started working this way, we noticed most of those things. And I'll share a bit of that story later too. But this is sort of a trick question. I want to hear those answers because those are the things we observed. But this is important for those of you who are managers, particularly. We work this way because we decided to work this way. That's the point I should emphasize most today. If we hadn't had the freedom to decide for ourselves how we wanted to work, it would have been almost impossible for us to do this. I've worked at a number of places where we weren't even allowed to pair program. It looked suspicious to a manager to see two people sitting at one computer. And this could drive a manager crazy. Matter of fact, my manager, the guy that hired me, and I honor him greatly, had promised me that he wouldn't interfere for a year. And this is part of this story, because I don't think we could have accomplished what we did. And when we started working this way, we were in a room, going from conference room to conference room. And then one day, after doing that for a week or two, we decided to find a permanent spot. And we found a little office. We moved everything off to one side and put our desk in there and projected up on the wall. And the manager came by, the director of our department. So what are you guys doing in here? And I said, we're having a meeting. And he said, oh, that's great, because managers love meetings. They think meetings are what gets work done. So off he went. But he came back 2 or 3 days later, and he said, point blank, why are you meeting all day, every day? So I was able to say, remember, you're not allowed to interfere. So I don't know why we're doing this. We're just learning why we're doing this. That's the whole point. That's the whole point. Okay, let's go on. So we've talked a little bit about what it is and why we do it, and now a bit about the techniques that we use. So first of all, I started doing Agile software development in, I got to think back now, 1998 or 9 before they were calling it Agile. Because because I got introduced to the idea of extreme programming. And extreme programming and Agile are very closely related, as you probably know. So I had learned about pair programming very early on, and I started doing it somewhere around 98 or 99. And by 2003, it took me 4 or 5 years to become really good at it, and it became my preferred way of working. And when I was first introduced to it, somebody would show me one way and someone would show me something else, and I ended up with this basic idea that I liked, they called the driver navigator. So with the driver navigator, conceptually, somebody would be sitting at the computer typing in what the navigator is talking about. But what would usually happen is it turns into driver observer. So there's somebody at the keyboard typing and somebody else watching the code getting put in. That's not particularly pair programming, not the way I would like to see it. It kind of follows this sort of a rule. If I have the idea, I take the keyboard. Now, I might explain what I'm doing, but it's kind of hard to explain stuff while you're typing code. And I know this works because I've solo programmed for many years, and then I worked this way for many years. Until 2007 or 8, I was introduced to another form of driver navigator from a friend of mine, Llewellyn Falco, who I believe invented this way. He had a guideline that he used that was the opposite. This is a really important thing. For an idea to go from somebody's head into the computer, it must go through someone else's hands. Now, what would that require to have happen if we were to do that? Anybody shout it out? Communication. And communication is not me telling you something like in this talk. Communication is got to be 2 ways. I say something, you reflect it back. I modify what I said, you reflect it back. We start discussing. Now we have an understanding. And once we have that understanding of where to start, we can just start. And this is a very important thing. The moment I learned that, I won't go through the whole story. I sat with Llewellyn to work on some open source stuff. And after a couple of hours of doing it, I started realizing this is really a great way to work. And I changed my preferred way to work. So this is basically what we expanded on. So I'm sharing this technique because this is the way we did mob programming. It may not be the way other people would do it. We originated the idea and the term more or less. But I didn't hear of anyone talking about this before we were doing it, and we got a lot of interest in it, and that's why I'm here today. It's because people started inviting me to come to conferences, and I'm very thankful for that because I really enjoy it, and I feel this is a good thing for people to know about. However, the basic idea with driver navigators is that we have the driver whose main job is to hear the idea that has to turn into code or whatever it is we're working on, because it doesn't have to be code only. It could be tests we're doing, documents we're writing, emails. It could be almost any work that a team or team member would do can be done this way. If the driver interferes by questioning things too much, it slows things down. So I like to, well, I'll share it in a moment. I like to think of the driver in a different way than the rest of the team. They're not the programmer. Everyone's a programmer. Everyone else on the team, the navigators, are programming. They just may not be capable of writing code themselves specifically, because a product owner may never want to know how to write code. Testers nowadays more and more can write code, but that may not be their specialty. The database expert may only be familiar with 1 or 2 languages, front end with another couple languages. Here's the thing, we still follow that same rule. Now we need to have some kind of techniques of communication that keep this from turning into just a bunch of people arguing about what are they going to do. So this is the basic way that we do it, and I'm sharing this with you because it's an easy way to learn to do this. Now we use a keyboard. Does anybody here use a keyboard in their work? Let's see a show of hands. Do you use a keyboard? Does anybody not use a keyboard? Okay. Why do we use a keyboard? You all claim that you use keyboards. Why do you use them? To write stuff, yes. Why do we use a keyboard to write stuff? Because it's the only way, and what did you say? It's the only way we can communicate with the computer. I think there are other ways, but what else? It's fast. Well, how about if I was talking to you like this? driver/navigators. You would say, get rid of this person. Because why would I communicate to you 1 character at a time? Now, we have to get pretty fast at typing to make that work. Would we not want a better way than this? We do it not because it's the only way, because it seems like the only reasonable way to do it. Wouldn't we want a better way? What if you could just sit down at the computer in the morning and say, you know what I want is a customer management system, and what I'd like to do is, and it starts creating the application. Would you work that way? Because the keyboard is a bottleneck for us. We speak with it in characters and shortcuts and copying and pasting mostly and stuff like that. Whereas we would like to communicate with ideas. Let's try this. No, wait, let's try that. No, erase that. No, let's try that. What if we did that? What if we could work that way? I think we accidentally stumbled upon that. So I think with the driver concept, we have a smart input device. The keyboard is a dumb input device. And the driver is a smart input device. Now in California, this is how programmers look. They have colored hair and it goes straight up and stuff like that. I can't do that anymore, but when I was younger, I could do my hair like that. Believe me. But here I haven't seen too much of that. My wife made all the pictures and the art and I like to use her pictures. She actually made these pictures specifically for me, this specific slide, but the rest of it is just, I gather it out of her portfolio and ask her permission. So I'm honoring her right now by mentioning that on camera and in front of everybody. I love her artwork. And she's a children's book illustrator, and I got a couple of her books here I'll show you later if you want to see them. Everybody on the team is a navigator. Not everybody has to take the keyboard to be a driver, but they're invited to, even if they can't code, because we can code with a complete newbie at the keyboard, because we can instruct them at the level they can understand. We will give the instruction at the level of intent and then the level that the person at the keyboard can understand. For example, what I do want is a system where we're going to send customers emails based on some sort of a rule system. As we write that, I could say, if it was a competent, experienced program, I could say, we're going to need to new up a customer, then we got to get a collection of their invoices, because we're going to check if they got a late payment, and we're going to send them an invoice, send them a warning if they've got a late payment. And somebody could start coding that. But if they never coded before, we can go to line 32, type in public void, if you're using a typed language, public void get customer, and then we're, whatever. So this is something that's kind of important to me, is that we have everybody we need to navigate and enough people to drive that we can keep going throughout the day doing this. We need all the skills and all the knowledge to get this work done. The skills, some of it is writing code, but there's a lot of other skills involved as well. We rotate, now at Hunter, where we originated this idea, I'm pointing to my monitor. At Hunter, where we originated this stuff, we had a 7 to 10 minute rotation. We originally started with a 4-minute rotation. That means the person at the keyboard would change out every 4 minutes. And then we eventually moved up to about a 15-minute rotation, and now they're at somewhere about a 6 to 7 minute rotation. When I made this slide, it was 7 to 10 minutes. But you can use any number you want. There's no rule about that. You'll see we use a timer. Our particular timer we wrote for ourselves, and now people all over the world have written them. The basic idea of the timer is to just blank out the screen so that you can't keep typing after your turn. In the earlier days, we used our phone as a timer, and we would ignore it after a while. And this way, we couldn't ignore it, and it works really well. And you can find those. Ours is available for free as open source on Git or something, and through GitHub, and there's others who've written them. Anyways, it kind of goes like this. Whoops, I just hit the wrong button there. There we go. So the first person who's going to work for the morning will sit down, and then everybody else will just start working with them. Someone says, well, let's try this thing, and we just rotate through. Well, let's write a unit test for that. I can even narrate what we're going on. Well, we need a customer, and then we're thinking at the same time. What if we do this? And we're thinking ahead. If I'm the database expert, I might be thinking, well, we're going to need a query in just a minute, and I can start thinking about that. We're all in the same context, thinking about the same code from the point of view of our expertise. Now, I don't know a lot about a lot, but I do know that when you gather people together to get something done, if you can work well together, that can go very smoothly and flawlessly, directly from beginning to end. When you separate them, not so good. So that's what this was about. At the end of the rotation, we would just start over again. Again, there's other ways to do this. Am I going too fast? Am I going too slow? Okay. Now we have about another 30 minutes or 20 minutes. So I can only cover so much in a talk like this. So we've covered the basics. What it is, why we did it, and how we do it. So I want to share some other things as we go. So I'm going to quickly tell you how it started, because this answers a lot of questions people ask. We discovered mob programming. We didn't invent it. People used to ask me, how did you come up with this? Did you say, hey, let's try this, let's try that? It was almost purely by accident. I had been hired at this company to solve problems for a team that had some big problems with projects. They also had some personality problems and interaction problems. And I'm well known in the San Diego area, where I'm from, with the Agile kind of thinking and stuff. And I was looking for a challenge, and this was a job that was offered to me. So I decided to go in if we could follow some rules, and you heard my first rule, the basic idea, there would be no interference, because it takes a while to figure this stuff out. It's not something you just go in and follow the instructions of somebody, and then things are going to get better. I had read the code, and I'm not, I don't mean to dishonor anybody, but it was not good code. I read a lot of code of 3 or 4 projects that they had been working on, and I knew they needed to get better at writing code. Their code needed to be cleaner at least. There were lots of problems I saw in the code, but I didn't want to be the new boss who got hired to come in and tell the team, you didn't program very well. You're not good at programming. How would you like it if your new boss came in, set you down and said, hey, you guys are terrible? You know, you would want to not work there anymore. Probably what you would do is make it harder for that boss to do well. I'm not meaning to say you actually would do that, but I've made that mistake before of telling people their code isn't any good. I wanted them to tell me their code isn't any good. And the way that I had gone about doing that is this next little batch of things. It's not just about the code. Okay, the first thing, I wanted to have the right to cancel a project or put it on hold until we were good enough to do the project. We're going to figure out how to work well together. Somehow or another, that's going to be a big part of our focus. I believe that the people doing the work are the ones who can best determine how to do that work. They're the ones that are in the trenches, and they will learn what they need to do if they're given the freedom to do it, how to work well together. I believe that we should practice together. Now, I wanted them to learn about clean code. To me, clean code is absolutely important. Without clean code, what happens is, no matter how fast we're going today, we're going to be going slower tomorrow, and slower the next day, and slower the next day. So projects usually start out where we're going pretty smoothly for a few weeks. And then after a few weeks, we start thinking, oh man, this is getting hard, and we're getting behind. And after a few months, it starts turning into a nightmare. That's not unusual. What do people usually say when it starts turning into a nightmare? Rewrite. You get a couple new people in because a couple old people left, and they go, this thing's a mess. We got to rewrite it. And with what we know now, it'll go a lot faster this next time. Never true. And so, I didn't want to just learn about those things, how to break stories down into smaller bits, and how to have clean code, how to work well together is more important than those things. And I noticed over the last 15 or so years that when we study together, we build relationships that we can't build while we work together. So it was important to me that we would study together and at least have a chance of building a helping relationship with each other. And then we take that back to our work. This has worked for me over and over again, I would say, gradually as I got to understand it, that this works well. Let's be in a helpful relationship, and that will spill over into our daily work. When we're in the pressure of doing the work that we're doing today, we often will not be as helpful to others. If we're required to have something, let's say, done by the end of the day, and someone comes to us for help on their thing they need to get done, we now have a decision to make. Shall I help them get done, or shall I get my work done? So these are things we have to decide throughout the day. It's almost a political sort of question. Do I want my review at the end of the year to be better or worse? So in studying together, we take that pressure away. So we set aside 3 hours a week to work this way, to study together, and we decided to use a coding dojo style. The coding dojo style we were going to use, I had learned through Llewellyn Falco. He picked it up from some people from France who were at a conference in Chicago, so it's kind of been around the world. But basically, somebody's going to sit at the computer, And somebody's going to stand next to them, and the person at the computer is the driver, the person standing is a navigator. However many other people are involved are observers until the timer goes off, and everybody moves over one seat. The navigator becomes the driver. Of course, the driver got up out of the seat first. Otherwise, you'd be sitting on their lap. Don't want to do that. And the next person coming up to navigate will be the next one in line. So we're switching out the pair every 4 minutes. And that's how we studied. And it actually worked really well. We were also focusing on getting better at retrospectives. I've noticed many places I visited, retrospectives are done, but they're not very helpful. What we did is we compressed the time between doing retrospectives. So instead of doing them every 2 weeks or at the end of a project or whatever, we started doing them every day for about 5 minutes at the end of the day. We'd spend 5 minutes in a short retrospective, and we always would ask ourselves this one question: what went well today so we can turn it up? We would answer with one thing we noticed that we thought went well, and we would turn it up. Whatever that meant for the next day. That kept us from waiting 2 weeks to see if we were making progress. So one day, then, it was time to resurrect one of these failing projects that I put on the back burner. And the two developers that had worked on it previously with some contractors had come to me and they said, hey, the deadline's getting close for this thing. We need to get back to work on it. And I said, okay. Go take a look and tell me what you want to do. Well, they went off to do their thing and look at it, and within a few hours they came back, and they told me, this code is terrible. If you remember, that was one of my initial goals, so I felt really good about that. They now knew enough to tell me this code that was written 6 months earlier was not very good. So I said, what do you want to do about it? He said, well, let's gather everybody together in a room, and let's look at the code and decide, do we need more people to help, or how are we going to do this? So we got in the room, and we were actually going to do exactly that. We're going to look at it, decide if we need to assign more people to the work, and then go off and do our work. And this was still 3 months from the deadline, but there was 3 months worth of work to do on it as far as we could tell. And a funny thing happened. We started working on it together. One of the team members said, look at that long method. Another win for me. They could tell what bad code looked like, long methods. Bad names, large classes, no cohesion, tons of coupling. All the things we can look for in code smells, they had been learning about. And somebody said, look at that long method. They stood up and started navigating the person that was at the keyboard. And they just said, hey, you know what, let's extract out that first paragraph. We had learned along the way this kind of rule. If you can't understand the code, if it's too hard to read to do a fix you need to do, then just start refactoring it. You'll learn a lot more about it doing that, and the code will be easier to work on after that. So that was something we'd been learning to do, and there we just started in naturally doing it. After an hour and a half or so, somebody came into the room, and they said, hey, we've got this room reserved. You have to leave. Immediately, someone on the team said, let's go find another room. And nobody else said, no, let's not do that. So we just went and found another room. We were turning up the good in real time. That very moment, it exploded for me that this was in just a day's time was the whole reason that I had gotten there. We're now working as a team. We're turning up the good as we go. We know what good and bad code looks like. And the team was really starting to act the way that I was hoping they would, although I never knew it would be mob programming. It's not about mob programming. It's about working well together. So this is the basic thing for me. And this is probably where we can, are we at the end of things now? Getting close? 10 minutes. I can speak faster. Okay. But let's cover this a little bit and see if we want to cover anything more. And there'll be a question and answer period after that? Oh, that is including it. Okay. So you have a chance to answer some questions. They know that they can be sending questions in right now, right? And you have some. Okay. And I'm going to be here all day today and tomorrow, and I like to hang out and answer questions so we can cover more later. It was this combination of tiny ideas that led to something that I'd learned in my 20s, and it's this. The object isn't to create art. It's to be in that wonderful state which makes art inevitable. If you go directly to trying to do the work that you think needs to get done, you lose the chance of becoming prepared to do that work well. And I've seen this over and over in teams. They are under such pressure to get the work done, they don't figure out how to make it easy to get the work done. And that's what I felt we were trying to do. So I take a great deal of pleasure in that we were able to fulfill this concept. Now, normally for me, I'll work at a place for a while, and then I'll kind of get bored with it, and I'll go somewhere else. And this place, I'd figured I'd be there 2 years, and this was only 6 months into it, and as soon as we did this, it became too interesting to me to want to leave. And I ended up staying there for 4 years. In the 3.5 years after we started working this way, as far as I know, we only had 3 bugs reported in our work, and we did something between 20 and 40 projects in that time. We became very productive, writing really high-quality code, but the secret is we're just writing enough code because the product owners are working with us. And as soon as we get something they like and they're using, which usually only took us a day or two, they could start steering it to what they really wanted. And once we got to where they felt that wasn't so important to them anymore, that there was another thing they wanted to work on, at that point, we could switch off of something. Instead of doing everything they could possibly want on that first project, we could start introducing something else they wanted, unrelated. And this became a big win for a lot of people at the company. So this putting ourselves into a situation where we could get good at what we needed to do, and it made it easier and easier to do, was really the story of mob programming. It's not so much about let's all sit at one computer, but let's find a way to work well together. Let's just do that. So, this is a question I often would get. How can you do this? Because programmers will just sit and argue about stuff all day long and not get any work done. We have to separate them so they will get work done. And we need to have some kind of a facilitator to keep them from arguing all day. I know you don't do that here, but in other parts of the world they do. So what do we do about that? Well, we started getting on each other's nerves somewhere along the way. I don't remember when. I should go check my notes. But somewhere, let's say 3 or 6 months into it, we noticed that we were getting on each other's nerves. Because people have tics and habits and stuff that not everybody appreciates. Somebody might be navigating another person, and they're too short in their responses. Who knows? But anyways, after a while, we started getting on each other's nerves, and we noticed it. This is one of the things at the end of the day. We weren't just looking for turning up the good. We were going to say, like, guy, it was too tense today. And so then the question has to be, how do we turn up the good on having it relaxed? So we decided to have a little meeting, and we got together, and we asked ourselves this, I think I missed a slide in here, and I might not have it. We asked ourselves a question. How do you want to be treated by your coworkers? And we each wrote down on Post-it notes. One word answer to that. How do we want to be treated? I want to be treated with fill in the blank. We gathered about 100 of those. We spent an hour doing it. And after we had those, we grouped them by theme, and we came up with these 3 themes: kindness, consideration, respect. But we didn't know how to do that. How do we treat each other with kindness, consideration, and respect? We hadn't really thought about it. And clearly we weren't already doing it, or else we wouldn't have this problem. So we made a little deal with each other. For one day, we're going to pretend that we are kind, considerate, and respectful people. For one day. Let's just pretend that that's the way we are. And at the end of that day, we had our little retrospective, 5-minute, and everybody said, let's do that again tomorrow. And after about a month of doing that, we had started looking up in search engines. In the U.S., we use Google. What do you use here? Alta Vista? No. So we started looking up. I haven't used Alta Vista in 20 years. I don't even know if they still exist. Do they still exist? That we don't know if they exist or not is probably a good indication they might not. Anyways, I'm sorry, Alta Vista. This is on film. They're going to know I said that. So let's put a cap on this. We started looking up, how do you listen better? How do you understand? How do you communicate? What does it mean to be respectful? How do you act kindly? And we started learning how to do that. I'll put it this way. I think today I'm a much better person than I was 6 years ago. Working with a team that's focusing on treating each other well is a real blessing. It helps you become a better person. So I want to share one last thing, and then we'll go to questions. Is that a good timing? I want to talk about this. People would come to us after we started sharing this, and they say, we're trying it, but we can only do it for an hour or 2 a day because it is so energy draining. It wears us out. And we didn't have that experience. We were not getting worn out. So we started trying to figure out what this means. And this is what I believe. I believe that when we first start working this way, we feel we need to understand everything that's going on. But you don't. You just have to keep your expertise sharp so when it's needed, you can contribute the right thing at the right time and in just the right way. You don't need to contribute on everything. Your voice isn't needed on everything. That's why we have everyone gathered together. But when it's important for you to speak, you should. And you should do it in such a manner that's conducive to working well together. So we found we could get through to the end of the day feeling very relaxed, not feeling like we were wearing ourselves out, because we are not trying to stay, I would say, razor-sharp focused all through the day. We don't need to stay super focused on the work we're doing, just sufficiently to get us where the whole team is moving from beginning to end on whatever we've chosen to work on. So if it's just the right moment for me to talk about a query and somebody else is to say, we could do this with the interface, and the product owners to say, you know, I'd rather not have a drop-down box. Let's just put 3 radio buttons or whatever you call them nowadays. So this is the thing. We can stay relaxed if we don't think we need to know everything and learn everything. We're going to learn enough in this process, and we're going to understand enough. So I'm going to kind of shut it down with one last slide. If we have some questions, let's go ahead and start taking those. People will ask me, there's one question I want to cover. Yeah. No, I want to cover one last thing. Is that okay? And then so I just want to show my last slide. People asked if we recommend mob programming, and I like to say we don't. What we really do is we recommend that you know about it, and if you want to give it a try, you're invited to give it a try. That's what I wanted to say. Make that clear. All righty.
Let's give him a hand before the questions.
Thank you very much.
There is a lot of questions. Luckily, 80% of them can be boiled down into 2 questions.
Okay.
One of them, well, these 2 are actually together. So I have one saying, and don't start answering it yet. Why would a graphical designer want to sit and write code? Seems ineffective and not a smart driver. It is faster that I sit at the keyboard. It goes together with this question, I think. How do you get the product owner to stay in the room when things get technical? And those 2 go together with the final question, which is, how do you deal with or influence people that are stuck in the mindset, we all need to be working on our own stuff to be productive?
Yeah, so that's all the slides I left out. So the productivity question is there's 2 questions that always would come up first when I give this talk. One is, what's the right number of people? And the other is, how can you possibly be productive with 5 people sitting at one computer? My original answer, first of all, to that question of how can you possibly be productive was, I don't know. We just are. Is it important to know how? So for me, it wasn't important to know how. I think we block ourselves often from the good things if we think we need to understand how this is working. Matter of fact, there's a great quote from Peter Block. Transformation comes more from pursuing profound questions than seeking practical answers. To me, this means a good question leads to a better question. And a better question than how can you be productive at first was, I want to ask the reverse question. How can we be productive if we separate people that should be working together? Why do we think that's productive? Why do we assume that dividing the work up and putting individuals to work is better? Now, you've heard the term divide and conquer. Has anybody ever heard that? Do you know what that means? It doesn't mean divide your troops up so they can go conquer. It means divide what? The enemy. Right? So we can divide the work up into little bits, and then we focus all of our power on that. That is really productive. So we found that everybody on the team was relaxed, including coders, database, tester, everybody, because we're not focused on little bits of something. We're focused on the bigger picture all together, all the time. Now, how do you convince people to do that? I don't know. We never tried to convince anybody. It's always by invitation. But the product owners that decided to work with us became very happy because they were now getting delivery of their products almost immediately, literally within a day or two of starting on a project, we would start delivering something. And then we would deliver something every day for them. And they liked it. They didn't have to think about everything up front, just the overall idea of the project. So the product owners, when we first started, would come to us an hour or two a day, usually. I like to have them there longer if we could, but it's what we had. But now, the way that it's set up at Hunter, they have an office within the software development department. So in our floor, in our area, there's an office for them, and they can come out and work with the teams any moment they're needed. The biggest block I've seen in most software projects is waiting for answers. And who is it we need to ask those questions to besides Google? Because we can Google all kinds of things except for the nature of what this project we're supposed to be doing is about. And there's only one person that can really answer that. And we want that person to understand they'll get their project, they'll get their value much quicker if they work closely with us. If it's technical stuff, they don't need to be focused on the technical stuff while they're there. They can still have their computer and think about other things. It's not about having that pinpoint focus on what we're doing this moment, but that you're there in the same context every time we have a question. So we can keep moving quickly. And this is what flow is about. Did we answer all those questions or no? I can go on about an hour on this topic alone. I have a whole talk just on that.
In that case.
Yeah.
So there is actually an answer in here for you.
Okay.
Alta Vista was bought by Yahoo and shut down in 2013.
What's that?
Alta Vista was shut down in 2013.
Oh, did you somebody look that up?
Mm-hmm. Who looked that up? Oh, thank you.
There we go.
I know it's lunch, but there is one question which covers about 30% of these questions, and I think we should take that. So when you're playing cooperative games, there's an evil pattern that turns out is that somebody takes on the leader role. How do you prevent that from happening in mob programming, that one just says, you do that, this should be like this?
So this is a good question, because learning to work well together really does mean we have to learn about ourselves. And a wonderful thing that happened to me on the team at Hunter, for me, was one of the people on the team who was a tad older than me, had a lot of experience with things, was really good at taking me aside so I wouldn't be embarrassed and tell me sometimes if maybe I'd hurt somebody's feelings, or if I was trying to push my own way too much. I was the manager of this team. I would be the most likely one to tell people what to do. You have to learn to control yourself. If there's somebody who's taking over, the team can figure out how to let them know and help them become better at working with the team. Now, normally, you're not going to have much of that when you really have a group of peers together. If it's just programming, you might just get somebody who says, I know all this, just watch me. But essentially, we have to learn to work well as a team. There are going to be fewer and fewer problems to solve that are one-person problems. As the future unrolls, we're going to find more and more reason to work well as teams. And that's what mob programming is about. If we go right back to the very beginning, it's about learning to work well together. So I don't have an answer on how to solve that, but I do think we need to, as teams, figure out how to solve that. There we go. All righty.
Thank you.
Thank you.